in a time like ours where everything is statistics and hysteria and making us generally nervous, it is an audacious, subversive act of beauty to not talk from that side of your mouth, not to see from that left-sided part of your thinking, but to open up again that right wonder eye of your imagination. Hello there and welcome to Jawbone. It would appear that spring is springing on the moor. You may have noticed the change in the light. So let's begin with a poem that has some of the energy of spring in it. Now this is by William of Poitiers, who was really one of the very first of the troubadour poets, if not the first, and it has some of that essential 12th, 13th century energy in it. So, in the sweetness of spring, words turn green, and the birds sing on, each in their own particular Latin. And I remember that sweet war that we brought to an end when you gave me your faithful valley and your ring. I want my God to let me live long enough to have my hand under your cloak again. I want my God to let me live long enough to have my hand under your cloak again. So we have the divine world crashing into the creaturely world, crashing into the world of the senses and nature. All of it's happening in one delicious, pungent passage. It's a longer poem than that, but that's the beginning of it. And so who else would I have in my little rattle bag today? Well, of course, there was the great Minnesotan pig farmer, Bill Home, and his poem, Advice. Many of us will know it by heart. Someone dancing in us learnt only a few steps. The do your work in 4/4 time and the what do you expect waltz. Now they haven't noticed yet the woman standing away from the lamp, who knows the rumba and strange steps in jumpy rhythms from the mountains of Bulgaria. Now, if you dance with her, something unexpected may happen. But if you don't, you can be sure that the next world will look a lot like this one. And judging by the way things are going at the moment, we don't want the next world to look a lot like this one. Well, I'm glad to be here today, and those poems have helped provoke what I think I want to talk about for the next few minutes, which is Ways of Seeing. There's a very famous book by John Berger with that title, Ways of Beholding the World, and I think I will tell a Dartmoor story about that very issue, an old fairy tale. But before I get there, Ways of Beholding. Well, I'll tell you a story about when I met an angel. Yeah, let's begin there. The day that I met an angel. I was traveling in America. It was early doors for me. I would have had no phone or anything like that. I just sort of wove my way across the country to wherever it had been arranged that I would be found or picked up. And I was being dropped off on a back road in Vermont. And I had to get to Maine by the end of the day, which is some distance. It's several states. Some of you will know it. And it was promised that at some point a bus was going to come to this very desolate stop, you know, an absolute flank of trees on either side of the road. And no real sign that it was actually an official stop at all. But at some point the bus would come and I would be taken all the way to my destination, Portland, Maine. Well, I wait and I wait and I wait and I wait and nothing happens. And after 3 or 4 hours, the light is starting to change and the shadows are getting longer. As I said, there's no one for me to call. I'm not living in a screen type universe. You know, I've only been out of living in the tent for a few years at this point. Well, I was really starting to panic, and maybe a few prayer flares were flying around when this limousine pulls up. Big, long limo. No one in the back. Zzz. Is the driver. The chauffeur is in the gear. He's got the hat on. He's got the whole thing. And he says to me, whatever you're waiting for is not coming. It's quite a statement, isn't it? And I said, well, what on earth am I going to do? I don't know anybody. And he said to me, where do you need to go? And I said, well, I need to go to Portland, Maine. It's a distance. And he said, get in the back. And I got in the back of the guy's limo. He took me for a meal. I had my very first Mexican meal. He was a real person. It was a real car. It was a real vehicle. And at around 11 o'clock that evening, we rolled into the motel where I was staying. I thanked the guy. He turned and he drove off. And you tell me if the man wasn't an angel from a particular way of seeing that situation. Most of us have a fairly clear little black book of the devils we've met in our lives, but it's good for our health to remember the angels too, on occasion. So a long time ago, there was an old woman. She was a midwife, and she lived literally just up the road from it. If you and I were here now, we could walk to her door. This was a woman called Maude, and she lived in a village called Holne, just past the pub on the corner. Well, it was late at night and it was raining and she was in bed. And it was one of those nights where the rain was coming down and the house was creaking with it. You know, you needed ropes over the house to stop the wind taking it off. But the old woman is in bed surrounded by her cats, and she's sucking on a boiled sweet, as the elderly should do. There's a knock on the door. There's a knock on the door at midnight, and she looks out of the window, and sure enough, her house is on a slope and all the rain is rushing down. But there is a man on horse, this is a couple of 100 years ago, at her door. And she can somehow tell, in the way that old women can tell, that this is no ordinary man. This is fairy. This is the man of the Fae. Down here we call them the Benji when they show up on the moor. They are to be respected, but you steer clear. Well, anyway, maybe it was her experience or her years, but she padded through the creaky old house, didn't she? And she came to the door. And this was the situation. He said, if you deliver our child, my wife's child, I'll give you a bag with 9 huge bits of gold coin in it. And she said, well, where would that be? And he said, oh, it would be up at the Tor, just over the, a few miles up the hill. A Tor is a big lump of granite. It's like a little hill or a very, very tiny mountain, we optimistically call them. So she didn't think it through. That was more money than she'd ever seen. She got on the back of the horse with the Fey man, and they rode through the night. They rode through the wind and the rain and the glittering track, higher and higher and higher up on the moor. So they would have gone past Venford. They would have gone down into Hexworthy. You know Hexworthy. They would have gone through Hexworthy. They would have gone past St. Raphael's Chapel, then up onto the road that separates the North Moor from the South Moor. They would have gone on for a little while till they came to the super secret place where the king of the fairies lived, because he was no doubt a king of some kind. Now the rain is leathering down on the two of them. And what he takes her to looks nothing more than just a sort of a tussock, a bit of old grass, grass that even no animal would chew on. But he sort of moves it aside, and sure enough, there's something of a tunnel. The two of them, he and the old lady, crawl down the tunnel, and this is when reality changes utterly. Because it turns out just underneath the ground is this absolutely splendiferous sight. It is a gorgeous hall with great columns that have ornate carvings in, and there's skins on the floor, and there's bottles of wine, and there's a roaring fire. And in the middle of it, sure enough, is the queen of the fairies about to give birth to a child. I mean, it's actually happening there and then. Well, it's a thing, isn't it, when Mauda is so famous that her skill set has got over to what we call the other folk, the gentry, the people of the hill. But sure enough, it has. And there's just one bit of advice that the fairy man gives her. He says, when the child is born, take this fairy ointment, it's almost like mud, and wipe it on the eyes of the child. That's strange. What? Why? And he said, because without it, the child will not behold the universe in the way that we do. It is fairy ointment, and it is a bigger, more majestic world once you've had a bit of that on your eyes. So sure enough, she does her work. The baby is born. It was a fairly easy delivery, I'm delighted to say. And sure enough, when the baby came out, she had the ointment with her, and she wiped it on both eyes. Well, I don't know why she did it, but she did it. She took some of the ointment and she just daubed it on her right eye. And she didn't have time to process too much. She was given the money. She was escorted from the place. She was back on the horse with the king of the fairies, down the track, through the rain, down past Venford, past Hexworthy, past St. Raphael's Chapel, then down the hill, you know the way, into Holm, back to her cottage. And he said one last thing. He said, don't save the money, spend the money. Isn't that interesting? Don't hoard it. Don't become a dragon with it. Spend it. Enjoy it. And with that, the fairy turns and is gone. Well, this is when the story gets even stranger, because the next day when she woke up, her right eye had definitely been fumigated to the marvellous, let's put it that way, because everything she looked at was a kind of Blakean, more expanded universe. And when she closed her right eye, her left eye was everything that she was used to, everything that she'd seen her whole life, a very human, foursquare, pragmatic way of looking at things. But when she looked through her right eye, it was a sort of luminous, slightly overwhelming reality. It was, you could see the underpinnings of things. You could see angels talking to each other. You could see all sorts of little spirit gleams that are denied us most of the time in our lives. Maybe a few of the poets and the artists witness things like that, but it's not for most of us, that kind of consciousness. Well, the old dear has both going on now, but she wants to spend the money. So she makes her way down into the market town of Ashburton. So it's called a stannery town. It's where they used to collect tin from the moor and turn it into, their wages and their cheese and their cider. Well, by the time she gets to the market, she is in full psychedelic disarray. There are storytellers, local folk, that say that she's coming down past the River Dart, place I've swum in a million times, and as the salmon are leaping out the river, they've got the head of foxes. It's that kind of disorientation. But after a while, it's making her really strange, So she ends up in a pub called the Exeter Inn. She ends up in the snug round the back, and she has a couple of pints just to kind of, to ground herself, let's put it that way. Something medicinal in beer on occasion. But when she makes her way back out into the market, it is the same sort of, psychedelic quagmire as before. And it's then that she sees him and he sees her. It's the fairy man making his way, unseen, of course, because he's invisible to most people, picking his way slowly through the market, probably looking to get something for his wife. And he sees her, of course, and he sees her looking at him, and he knows he can be seen. So he makes his way over to her on the horse and he says, "Which of your eyes can see me? Which of your eyes can see me?" And with that, she gestured to her right eye. He pulled out his knife and he took out the eye. If it hurt, it only hurt for a second, but sure enough, suddenly, complete darkness enveloped half of her seeing. She never saw the world quite like that again. She lived to a very old age, And when she died, of course, the villagers came to inspect her house and remove the body. And a couple of kids pulled back her pillow, and what did they see? They saw the 9 coins. But even as they looked at those 9 coins, which she had not spent, she'd clung on to them. Even as they looked at what she'd clung on to, they became crumbly autumn leaves and flew away, just disintegrated. So that is the story of the midwife, the one who lived up the road. It's a wild old thing, isn't it? It's a wild old thing. I love the detail today about the fact that her reputation has even got to the fairy, that she's a great midwife. In Irish myth, there is the stories that at night when the fairy gather around the fire, Tuatha De Danann, the people of art and skill, when their storytellers tell stories, it is our lives they are telling of, which is why we have to live interesting lives. If we don't, our lives are not substantial enough to keep the fairies entertained, and you want to keep them entertained. And I think the other thing that occurs to me today is that actually I feel culturally that we've lost that eye. We've lost that fairy eye. Now, I'm not saying you want to see the world as a fairy does. That sounds exhausting. What we hear from her, and we do meet people who have, maybe through mental health issues or other ways, too much great spirit, as the Lakota Sioux would put it. But I think that we've lost something culturally for sure, and we look at a 4-square world most of the time. So my thought today, as I finish really, would be to advise us all to learn a few poems by heart, just like I did at the beginning. Because when you learn poems by heart, or you learn a story by heart, like that story of the midwife, it does something to you. As Rumi says, I've probably said it before, these words dive cold on the page. They need to be incubated in the mead hall of your jaw, in the adventure of your tongue, and then corn can grow from it. And in a time like ours, where everything is statistics and hysteria and making us generally nervous, it is an audacious, subversive act of beauty to not talk from that side of your mouth, not to see from that left-sided part of your thinking, but to open up again that right wonder eye of your imagination.